What has become of those once bustling Chinese-Korean villages on the border between China and North Korea? Young people packed up and fled to South Korea, while Han Chinese residents are either headed to Russia for work or try to run small businesses to get by. All that's left are elderly people staying behind in empty villages. The rent is ridiculously low, only 100 yuan per month. You can pick any place, but even with that, no one's interested. The government, desperate, launched a big offer. If you stay for a year, each person gets a 3,000 yuan subsidy, 6,000 yuan for a couple. Still, no one took it up. On social media, local residents exposed the hidden catches of this border subsidy. The village has to be between 0 to 3 kilometers of the border to qualify. But proximity alone isn't enough. Your household registration there and settle in. The village committee first registers your ID card and bank card, collects facial recognition data, and you even have to live there long term. You have to scan your face every day. Though it only takes a second, you must do it for 15 days each month. There's also one strict rule. Children under 16 are excluded. This isn't a subsidy. It's basically buying your life for 3,000 yuan and making you guard the border. The flood of advertisements on TikTok try to attract outsiders, but who would want to go there? The area is freezing cold, and the Korean peninsula could flare up in conflict at any time. When the pandemic hit in 2020, North Korea was completely panicked. In January, Kim Jong-un issued an order, and the China-North Korea border was locked down. A 482-kilometer-long fence was built. BBC reported that the fence was so tight, not even ants could crawl through. The trade between China and North Korea plummeted by over 90% from 2020 to 2022. The lives of Chinese Koreans and Han Chinese, who relied on smuggling and border trade, was cut off in an instant. The Chinese Koreans all ran to South Korea for work. Young people knew exactly what to do. Working in South Korea meant no language barriers. Wages there are 3 to 5 times higher than Northeast China. In 2023, the minimum wage reached 9,620 Korean won per hour, about 51 yuan, or $7. In Northeast China, it's hard to earn that much in an entire day. If you live frugally, you can save 200,000 to 300,000 yuan a year, numbers that seem impossible in Northeast China. Plus, with an F4 visa, working and living there are smooth, making it an irresistible temptation. The 3,000 yuan subsidy can't even buy you a decent meal in South Korea, so who would bother staying here? As for the Han Chinese, they were forced to head to Russia. But when the Russia-Ukraine conflict erupted in 2022, Western sanctions crushed Russia's economy in the Far East, blocking logistics and payments. Small-scale trade almost stopped. The Han Chinese who went to Russia to work in the Far East had to dig out salmon roe, which is grueling work. Sakhalin Island is freezing cold, with temperatures dropping to minus 20 or 30 degrees in winter. And even in summer, it's damp and windy. Standing there cutting fish for 10 hours a day, your legs go numb, your hands are covered in ice, and it hurts to move. The smell of fish guts hits your nose, and by night you can't even breathe properly. Your clothes are stiff and sticky, and when you get home, you're so exhausted you fall into bed without even taking a shower. Who would want to work in such a miserable place? The only reason they do it is for the money. You can make a few thousand yuan in a month, something that's unheard of back home in Northeast China. But it's a life-risking job. The cold makes it hard for your body to function. If someone could make that much money at home, no one would leave. But what else can they do? They can't stay in a ghost village and starve. The decline of the border villages didn't happen overnight, though. The roots were planted back in 2018. The China-US trade hit the Northeast's old industrial base, causing orders to disappear, factories to shut down, and jobs to be lost. In late 2017, the United Nations ramped up sanctions on North Korea, and by 2018, border trade had collapsed. Smuggling and laboring were no longer viable. On top of that, China's economic transformation made things worse for the Northeast, and young people had no choice but to leave. To go deeper, the roots of this desolation can be traced back to history and geopolitics. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, leaving North Korea without its support, and its economy fell apart. Constant floods and droughts devastated the land, and food production plummeted. The official rationing system completely collapsed, causing 1.5 to 3 million people to die of starvation, accounting for 5 to 10% of the population. People were so hungry they ate grass roots and bark, and some even resorted to cannibalism. The China-North Korea border became a hotspot for refugees, with many crossing into China illegally in search of a way to survive. In 1992, China and North Korea signed a friendship and cooperation treaty, and border trade boomed. Han-Chinese traders smuggled beef, ginseng, timber, and minerals from North Korea into China, while trading food, oil, clothes, and medicine from China to North Korea. Along the Yalu and Tumen rivers, Korean women carried heavy bags, crossing the river at night to earn a living. The border villages were once lively. In 2000, trade between China and North Korea surged to $1.7 billion. The northeastern border became North Korea's economic backyard, and China's border villages managed to get by. However, to the eyes of the two dictatorial regimes, China and North Korea, this was full of risks. From China's perspective, the villagers were gambling their lives on smuggling and labor. Once North Korea closed the border, the villages would instantly be left empty. People would flee, and law and order would collapse, creating major security risks. Strategically, the Northeast economy was tightly bound to North Korea, making China's policy toward North Korea limited. On the North Korean side, the Kim family regime was unwilling to rely on China for the long term. They preferred developing nuclear weapons and enduring sanctions rather than staying dependent on China. Why? To preserve the Kim family's dictatorship. Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and Kim Jong-un have ruled North Korea for decades using oppression. Nuclear weapons are their life-saving trump card. Internationally, they conducted their first nuclear test in 2006, followed by several more to intimidate the U.S., South Korea, and Japan. When Kim Jong-un took power, the development of nuclear weapons accelerated rapidly. In 2017, they tested a hydrogen bomb, forcing the international community to sit down for six-party talks in exchange for aid and reduced sanctions. Domestically, nuclear weapons symbolize military-first politics. The military is obedient, and people are afraid. Kim Jong-un is well aware that if North Korea embraced democracy with elections and free press, the Kim family would be finished. History shows what happens to dictatorships when the reins are loosed. In 2018, Kim Jong-un met with Donald Trump in Singapore, and the two discussed fiercely. Trump demanded that they dismantle their nuclear weapons in exchange for the lifting of sanctions. Kim Jong-un quickly agreed, but his real plan was to run to the Chinese Communist Party to negotiate. With China holding his lifeline, he didn't dare to make any reckless moves. Kim Jong-un pretended to dismantle his nuclear weapons, hoping to deceive the world. But Trump's intelligence network wasn't fooled. It saw through the trick and exposed him right away. From 2006 to 2017, North Korea conducted 6 nuclear tests, improving their technology. The technology came from China and Russia. In the 1960s, China shared nuclear technology with North Korea, and though China stopped in the 1980s, the roots of that technology remained. North Korea's nuclear program certainly had traces of Chinese influence. Therefore, the drama at the China-North Korea border is the result of the actions of China, North Korea, and Russia. North Korea is like a dog that China keeps on a leash, ready to be unleashed to bite the U.S. or scare Japan and South Korea. While the nuclear tests appear to be North Korea's own doing, the limited support and geopolitical calculations from China and Russia are undeniable. With the constant threat of war on the Korean peninsula and the shadow of nuclear war looming, who would dare to stay there for another day? The young people in the border villages saw through it all, packing their bags and leaving faster than anyone else. China's subsidies for border residents began showing signs from 2010 to 2012. In northeast China, they started issuing them between 2011 and 2012, with each person receiving 800 to 1,000 yuan per year. By 2018, the subsidies increased, reaching 2,500 to 3,000 yuan by 2022, with some areas offering up to 3,500 yuan. In areas like Tibet and Xinjiang, subsidies could go as high as 15,000 yuan. The CCP subsidies for border residents, amounting to just 3,000 yuan per year, serve several purposes. First, they help ensure that villages have some population, giving the appearance of stability at the border and preventing an influx of North Korean refugees and smuggling activities. Second, they enable the monitoring of the population via facial recognition and check-ins. Third, it's a show of strength to both North Korea and the U.S.-South Korea alliance, sending the message that the border is secure. The people essentially act as human shields, buying the CCP more time in case of an emergency. On the other hand, if the people don't live at the border, problems arise. Villages turn into ghost towns, losing face and becoming a source of mockery for both North Korea and the international community. Border control slips, leading to unchecked smuggling, and the US and South Korea could take advantage to destabilize the region. If North Korea collapses and refugees flood in, the cleanup will cost a fortune. So these border subsidies aren't a welfare program. They're a way for the CCP to pay 3,000 yuan for people's lives, using them to fill geopolitical gaps. Northeast China, where the China-North Korea border lies, was once the birthplace of China's heavy industry. Today, factories are rusting, cities are quiet, and young people have all left. Why has Northeast China failed to develop? The answer is simple. The CCP is afraid to fully develop Northeast China. Because this land is closely watched by North Korea, Russia, Japan, and South Korea, especially North Korea, whose Kim family has long coveted Northeast China and feels that China owes them a major debt. So this is a geopolitical game, and the outcome is still uncertain. No one knows where the next move will fall. If Northeast China develops too much and the Korean peninsula erupts into conflict, what happens if Kim Jong-un launches a nuclear strike? All the progress would be wasted. By not developing it, the region serves as a buffer zone, taking on risks in the event of a conflict. Let's first look at how the Kim family views Northeast China. During the Korean War in 1950, Kim Il-sung was determined to fight to the end, calling for the expulsion of American imperialism, even if it meant waiting decades. But Mao Zedong intervened, fearing that prolonged war would destabilize China and, worse, lead to the U.S. dropping atomic bombs. Mao persuaded Kim Il-sung to sign the ceasefire agreement, and the front line was set at the 38th parallel. Kim Il-sung couldn't accept this, with so many people had died, but the result was just half of the Korean peninsula. Wasn't this all just to help China hold off the US? To appease Kim Il-sung, Mao promised him the use of Northeast China. He said, "Your family originally came from Laobei. I'll help you train officials here, and you can visit any time." Kim Il-sung did visit Northeast China several times. There's even a rumored secret agreement that no one dares to confirm, where China was supposedly required to give 7% of Northeast China's GDP to the Kim family each year. But when Deng Xiaoping took over, that arrangement ended with no money given. Jiang Zemin took an even more extreme approach, sending a few cars from the FAW-Audi partnership to satisfy the Kim family, which infuriated Kim Jong-un, who felt that the CCP had forgotten its debts. But that's not all. To maintain the China-North Korean friendship, Mao Zedong generously ceded the Yalu River and Mount Bakdu. Now, if Northeast China becomes prosperous, what if Kim Jong-un steps up and says, "This land is mine"? How would the CCP respond? What could they use to shut him up? So, the CCP prefers to leave Northeast China in a half-dead state rather than take the risk of fully developing it. Now let's look at Russia. For them, Northeast China is a piece of land they can't swallow easily. The Far East has a sparse population but abundant resources. Historically, Russia fought with the Qing dynasty over territory. On the surface, China and Russia appear to be friendly, but underneath, Russia has been eyeing Dalian's ice-free port for years. If they could connect Northeast China with the outer Northeast, it would provide a springboard for developing the Far East. But now, with the Russia-Ukraine war raging and Putin struggling to hold Europe together, if he loses, he might have no choice but to turn east and ask China for help. If China seizes the opportunity to take advantage, it could potentially gain benefits from outer Northeast China and Siberia. But until this geopolitical game is settled, the CCP won't take any rash action. They'll let Northeast China sit and wait, watching the developments unfold. Let's not forget about Japan and South Korea, both of whom are closely watching the region. Japan has long been eyeing the Kuril Islands in the Far East, where oil and minerals are a big prize. After World War II, Japan didn't get much, but now with their economy rising, who wouldn't want to take another shot? As for South Korea, their relationship with the Korean peninsula is complicated and tangled, and if chaos erupts in Northeast China, they would have every reason to get involved. With so many eyes on the region, if Northeast China were to develop rapidly and war broke out, it would essentially be providing other countries with a chance to benefit. The CCP, weighing the options, has chosen to let Northeast China remain sickly, which is easier and less risky. At the same time, the CCP continues to fund and support North Korea, ready to unleash it as a tool to bite the US or intimidate Japan and South Korea. Kim Jong-un's nuclear development or border closures don't matter much. The louder the noise, the more of the attention of the US, Japan, and South Korea is diverted, which benefits China. But this strategy also carries risks. If Kim Jong-un truly loses control and launches a nuclear strike on northeast China, what will the CCP do? And if Russia can't hold out and the situation in the Far East shifts, can northeast China's buffer zone still hold? The CCP is uncertain. Northeast China's sickly state is a waiting game. The CCP is just biding time until the geopolitical situation in the Korean peninsula and Russia's Far East is settled, which depends on the outcome of Russia's conflict in Europe. This big geopolitical drama has no clear ending. Factories in northeast China will continue to rust, young people will keep drifting away, and the lives of ordinary people will remain hard. The China-North Korea border is less than 1,500 kilometers long. The Yalu and Tumen rivers start from the Changbai Mountains and wind through the mountains and scattered villages of Jilin and Liaoning provinces. Since the 17th century, the Korean ethnic group has settled here, encouraged by the Qing dynasty. Japanese colonization and war brought even more refugees, and Yanbian became their second home. Tumen City is just across the river from South Korea's a few hundred meters away, but separated by a dense border fence. A 25 yuan ticket can let you cross the old bridge, but just one step over the border is crossing the line. On the other side, the barren mountain peaks are said to have been stripped of trees since the 1990s famine, but locals quietly say they were burned by the Kim regime every year. To prevent hiding smuggled people, they burned it all down. This river separates countries but can't sever the cultural and linguistic ties. Today, despite subsidies and facial recognition systems, the villages remain empty. Young people vote with their feet, heading to South Korea and Russia, leaving only the elderly behind to mourn their ghost villages. The CCP spends small amounts of money to maintain the stability of their border, but northeast China remains sickly, with the shadow of border instability lingering. This geopolitical drama is still unfolding, and no one knows who will ultimately control this land. What's clear is that this land is different from other parts of China, and its relationship with China feels somewhat distant.